Hey everyone, I'm Mary Beth McAndrews, and I'm so excited to be here today with creator of The Horror of Dolores Roach, which is both a stage play, which became a audio drama, which now is a show on Prime Video. I'm here with Aaron Mark. Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you?
I'm so good. How does it feel to have your, I'm going to call it your baby, correct me if I'm wrong, coming to Prime and becoming a show? Like, what does that feel like?
It's really very surreal. It's completely surreal. I've been working on this for 10 years. It was 10 years ago
Yeah.
I wrote the play. And it's been my life for a decade, just steadily, we like to say Dolores, both the character and the project is unkillable. And that has been true.
That's amazing. So, okay, so you initially wrote the play called Empanada Loca, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was 2015? Is that right?
2015, we did our production
It's
off
been,
Broadway. I wrote it.
yeah.
We had developed it for about 2 years. I had been
Oh,
living in
cool.
Washington Heights at the time and
Okay.
was doing a series of one-person horror plays that nobody asked for.
Wait, that's cool.
And
That sounds so cool, though.
well, thank you. More of them. We did three of them off Broadway. I wrote another one actually that hasn't been done yet, but I love the form because it engages the imagination of the audience. You're in this
Yeah.
very intense, intimate experience with a character, and you have to imagine, the gore and the violence and all of that. So we did the play off Broadway in 2015, and then the podcast came out in 2019, and now here we are.
So okay. So where did the idea come from then with Dolores Roach? I know that it's based on the Legend of Sweeney Todd, not the musicals that we know of,
Sure,
but of the original story. So, but
sure.
where, like, how did this kind of all come together for you in starting Dolores Roach's journey?
Sure. Oh, yes. Well, that's what I was about to my brain. So I had been doing this series of plays, and I was living in Washington Heights. I lived there for 10 years, and I was watching it gentrify at the speed of light, and I felt like I was watching a neighborhood cannibalize itself. I mean, really, it's sort of a sledge metaphor.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
felt like, oh my God, this community is feeding on itself. And for me, that was oh my God, it's a cannibalism story set in a gentrifying neighborhood in New York City. And, certainly, I mean, I was a musical theater kid growing up. I still really am a musical theater kid in my core, and knew the Sweeney Todd musical and was really fascinated by how many iterations of this legend there had been since the mid 1800s,
Yeah.
almost all told about a white man as the character, and almost all of them, the musical that people know is really a story about revenge. The original Penny Dreadful is about greed. And I thought, what else is there to say about this character if this character is driven not by revenge or by greed, but really by a need to survive?
Yeah.
And I had been a Daphne Rubin Vega super fan and still am. Um, and so the initial idea 10 years ago was, okay, it's Daphne Rubin Vega as a contemporary Sweeney Todd in Washington Heights. And we developed it for 2 years all around New York City together, and then did our production off Broadway in 2015.
So cool. That's amazing. And so when you make, okay, so you have this play, and then
Yeah.
so then how did it become a podcast? Like, what was the journey from it becoming a stage play to an audio drama, a two-season audio drama?
Yes, thank you. That's two-season audio drama. A lot of people have not heard the second season, which is, I think, if you've heard it, you will agree. It's even more fucked up, if I may say, than the first season. I'm very proud of that. So, okay, so crazy story. So after we did the play, so even then I was saying Dolores is unkillable. There's more of her story to be told. I was living in Washington Heights still, came out to LA shortly after we did the play off Broadway and pitched around LA a TV version of the play.
Okay.
And people thought I was truly nuts. I mean, I was like laughed out of pitches. Um, and I thought, all right, well, it's not the moment for it. But I had all this material that was to be the serialized version of Dolores' story.
Hmm.
And what happened is that Mimi O'Donnell, who had run the Labyrinth Theater Company at the time and produced the play off Broadway, she had moved to Gimlet Media. Gimlet had just released their first scripted podcast, Homecoming, which ironically also
Oh
became a
yeah. Oh my God. Wow.
Mimi was looking for her first show to make at Gimlet. They wanted it to be a scripted horror show. She knew that I had wanted to do a serialized version of Dolores' story, and she brought the project over. So we made the podcast, weirdly enough, really based on material I had created for a TV pitch of the play. But I feel honestly like if I had not at the time, and I think Daphne would probably agree with this, we had let go of the idea of it being a TV series at that point, and it really was like,
Oh,
all right,
okay.
this is what it's meant to be. It's going to be we're gonna immerse ourselves in audio and make the best audio production we possibly can. And I honestly feel like if we had been making the podcast in order to get a TV show going, I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's so cool though, the journey that this has taken in like such a roundabout, weird
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, it continues to feel, I mean, now I'm having conversations about, doing the play again. I mean, it's like a whole,
you're
it's
like, where's happening?
really,
Because
it's
again,
really
like you
bizarre.
said, she's never gonna die. But
She's
I love
unkillable.
that because she's an
Yeah.
incredible, complicated heroine who you both empathize for, but she's also kind of a bitch, which I love. And I
Sure. Yeah.
and I love that she's complicated. And I actually I spoke with Justina, who plays Dolores Roach in
Yeah.
the show, about it and
Yeah.
loves about the queerness of Dolores. And I
Yes.
wanted to hear
Yes.
more about this with you because as a queer woman myself, I really picked up on like in the show, which I'm the most familiar with, like these
Yeah.
bisexual tones, and I love that. And I wanted to hear more from you about putting queerness into Dolores's
My
story.
God.
And yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm so happy to talk about that. I'm so happy it's in the show. Okay.
I know.
I
I
mean,
was so excited. I was like, chaotic bisexual Dolores Roach. I'm so happy.
yes. And by the way, I'm thrilled to hear that. And by the way, I'm really proud of this. It's never questioned in the show. No one has to have a conversation about it. It just is there. She's allowed to exist. I'm really, really, really happy that we were able to do that. I mean, look, the lack of bisexual representation is grotesque and egregious, to say the
Yeah.
very least. There were conversations, very early on, when I was working on the play. There were a lot of elements in the show that attempt to take tropes that we've seen a million times and go further with them.
Yeah.
And one of those tropes is, frankly, in the play, her relationship with Tabitha in prison. It's so tropey, the relationship in prison, and it ends there, and maybe it's a joke. And one of the things in the play that and again, not to speak for Daphne, but I think she would agree with that. We talked a lot about this in that period of time, to say, oh, you think you know this trope? You think this is a joke? No, no, no. This is real. We're going to play this out. What does this actually mean? This woman was in prison for 16 years. That, in my opinion, is the most significant relationship of her life. Not Dominic, who she spends chasing. Tabitha is absolutely, I think, the healthiest, most significant relationship of her life. So
I want a whole prequel with her and Tabitha. I'm just saying. I just want I want a love story between the two of them in prison together. I'm obsessed with their relationship.
From your mouth to God's ears. I mean, honestly, I think if we are lucky enough to keep telling the story for television, there is a lot more of Tabitha I want to explore. She's there. I mean, we see her briefly in the season. Certainly, I want to see more of her going forward, both in the present and in the past.
Yeah.
So it was really important that we sort of hold the mirror up. We flip that trope for an audience. Like, oh, you think you know what this is? No, no, no. We're going to really explore the significance of this relationship. And one of the joys then in revisiting it a third time for the TV series is that our amazing writers' room said, how do we deepen this even further? And then we were able to explore that dynamic as it emerges with the character of Marcy, played by the brilliant Judy Reyes. And I'm quite certain that if we go forward with the second season, there's a lot more of that to be explored.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear that because that was one of my favorite little subtle parts of the show. I was like, I love that she's queer, but it's not like a big deal. And like you said, we don't have the weird like, oh, she was in prison kind of trope that is always so icky. So I'm very excited to hear that.
Thrilled that you brought it up because I'm really
of course. So Daphne Rubin Vega plays Dolores on stage and in the audio drama. But now Justina Machado is playing Dolores Roach. Yeah. How did you kind of find your star for the show? And was Daphne ever considered for being the role in the show?
Well, Daphne is so embedded in this. And Daphne, I wrote the play for Daphne as a fan of her as a actress. Yeah. I didn't know until I worked with her what a brilliant storyteller she is in so many other facets. And we knew that Daphne wanted to focus on writing and producing. She's a writer on the show.
Okay, cool. That makes sense.
And should we go forward in season 2, she continues on as a writer and a producer. And she can do more of that. I want her to do more of that. I hope I'm lucky enough to do more of that, along with her. So she's known Justina for a very long time.
Okay.
Stina is somebody who came up really early on a short list of people that we should be so lucky to get to play this part.
Yeah.
We had a Zoom with Justina. I don't know if she told you this, but I later learned that one of our brilliant non-writing EPs, Gloria Calderon-Kellett, who is an extraordinary human and artist, had sent Justina the podcast when it came out and said to her, hey, if this ever comes around, this is a part for you. So,
whoa, I didn't know that. That's so cool. Again, the full circle.
I know, it's crazy. So Justina knew the project, and she and I had people in common, and I had a Zoom with her, and she said, I am Dolores Roach. This is my part. What do I have to do to get this part? I was like, what do you have to do? Like, we should be so lucky, and there was a moment, is she available? Can we get her? And I think Daphne was thrilled to pass the torch to Justina. And then it was the question of, okay, how do we now cast around Justina? How do we make sure that this is now tailored to this actress? This is her Dolores now. This is a new iteration entirely. And how do we make sure it feels like it's, specifically for her?
That's amazing. That's so cool to hear. And like how Daphne is still involved with it. I
Oh
love
yeah.
that. That's
I
so
talked
cool.
to her yesterday. Yeah, no, she loved the love and respect between the two of them is pretty incredible.
I love that. Well, then, and one of the people you kind of that came over from the podcast to the show is Keita Updike as Nellie, who I love. And I love that you kept her. Like, what was kind of the thought behind? Because she's one of the only people kind of kept on with the same role. So why did you keep Nellie and Keita to go into the show?
She's the only one. And, it was after, like I was saying, we had this moment where we knew, okay, it's going to be an entirely new cast. Which is a complicated thing at the time because our podcast cast is mind-blowingly amazing.
Yeah.
Across the board, as is the television cast. I mean, I pinch myself every day. And Keita's a friend. She was so uniquely involved in the podcast in really helping me find that character for audio. And she and I had become friends. And I remember a difficult conversation with her. I was like, look, it's gonna be a totally new cast. And she said, I don't care, I'm going to audition. She said, I'm sending in a tape, I don't care. I was like, oh, okay. And it was one of those things where, like, someone who's that connected to a role, we looked at the tape and we went, you know what? If we're going to bring one person with us, of course it's her. Like, that, it makes perfect sense. And as I said, she really had been uniquely involved in finding that character for audio. She continued to be uniquely involved in finding the character for television. And it felt really right, I think, to everybody on the team that she would be the on-screen connective tissue.
That's a big, and she's so good. I love her as Nellie, and I think it's so really cool to hear. And I spoke to her as well, and hearing kind of her like going through it is just really cool to hear that amazing through line, and the through lines that have been kept from like the beginning to the show of this show / series franchise. I don't know what we want to call it at this point, but it's really cool.
It blows my mind. Like, I mean, it's a very different entity. And I and the whole amazing team tried to really be intentional about not hanging on to elements because that's how we had done it, and really reinventing this could be its own thing. And at the same time, it blows my mind to this day that, I mean, there are passages of text in the series that are almost verbatim what they were in the play in 2015. I mean, it's just the most bizarre. It's all bizarre.
So cool. And like, what a cool thing to be able to see your work adapted to so many different formats. Like, that's probably a unique experience that I feel like not a lot of writers are able to have in terms of seeing their work in so many different places, and then also being so involved in making those come to life.
Yes.
Like, that is it sounds like a really cool, weird, but like awesome experience.
It's otherworldly. I mean, and it's truly unique. You're absolutely right. Not only that the project would cross these mediums, but that I would be able to come along. And that's not, I mean, I don't take that for granted. That was not a given at every turn. There were people in very key moments that really championed me being able to stick with the project. That's, I'm extremely lucky.
Yeah. So I wanted to pivot to actually talk about your use of weed in this show, because I love how you use weed in this, not as like kind of a way. I feel like weed a lot of the time in horror is kind of a joke, and I feel like here it is a much more kind of like everyday life thing, which it is
Yeah.
basically, and how
Yeah.
it's integrated also into talking about like people who are incarcerated for a long
Yes.
time for
Yeah.
possession and everything. And I wanted to hear more about incorporating like marijuana into the story and like why you chose that and why it was such a big part of Dolores' story.
Oh my God. Thank you for being the first person to ask me about that. Oh my
Oh,
God.
really?
Yeah, because I think of it. I mean, I often say it's part body horror, part stoner comedy. Like I really think that
Yeah,
weed is a character in the piece,
it
and
is.
Luis's sort of weed nerdism, which there's more of, I guess, in the podcast than the series, but it's still very present in the series.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of fetishizes the specificity of weed. I mean, there's
Watching her smoke medical grade marijuana for the first time since getting out of
yeah,
prison is the funniest thing I've ever seen because anyone who has smoked medical grade marijuana for the first time knows
yeah,
that feeling so well. Just being like,
yeah.
I have entered another dimension.
By the way, how good is Justina in that scene? Like, it
She's
really, it's hard to act stoned. Like, that's a
right.
very
I That's the thing,
oh,
without being silly and like weird. Oh, I love it.
she's amazing. And those moments, she has her post-kill ritual where she'll go for the blunt, and we have
It's
those
like
moments where we just let the camera linger on Justina's magnificent face, just smoking a joint, or blunt rather. Um, so the primary function, I mean, you sort of alluded to it in terms of story and theme, is this is why this woman was imprisoned. Like her life was taken from her for this fucking plant. And now, like, it's being sold at an Apple store, like, basically. Like,
by
she,
like
like,
a bunch of white people.
yeah, like, it's grotesque. I realize I used that word earlier, but, like, it truly is
It
grotesque.
is, yeah. Well, and
So,
gentrification of weed is such a big thing too, in terms of like how it has become co-opted and everything as well.
absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
and not only for Dolores, but I was really fascinated by the idea that Luis, who is clinging to the past in so many ways, that he also is faced with, like, he could go out and buy it legally, but no, he goes and buys it. Like, he's got a guy, like, he's not going to do that. He's wanting to be in a database. He doesn't want to support, that as an industry that's been co-opted by white people and is now completely gentrified. Felt like a really interesting way for Dolores to be faced with, this is your past, this is your past, this is your past, this is what was done to you, this is what was done to you, which is, from a narrative perspective, something that we were always looking for.
Yeah.
To activate the way that she behaves, frankly.
Yeah.
And you know I want to normalize it. Like, I also, I mean, the play was written at a time, like, as I said, I was living in Washington Heights, in a moment in time where like like there really had still been a crackdown.
Yeah.
Um, and I would be present and watch, like, routine busts on the block that I lived. Like, it just was
Yeah.
ridiculous.
For pot
For
of all things. Like,
pots. Like,
it's like
what? Like, that's what we're worried about?
meanwhile, dispensary opened up like two doors down.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
truly ridiculous.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
particularly the way that it's used as a weapon to criminalize black and brown people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the undercurrent in the show. And so, it's a tricky thing, I think, to say, Luis's weed use is an attempt to normalize it on screen, because he is also, of course, chopping people up. He's not, the beacon of, like, normality. However, I wanted there to be an element of the presence of weed that celebrates it as a medicine.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, and I, yeah, exactly. Like, not something about normalizing it in a world where like we're moving towards federal legalization. And like, I live in Maryland, it's getting legalized on Saturday officially. So like, it is
Yeah,
an
really?
important conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, recreationally legalized on Saturday in my state. And
Wow.
it's just like a conversation I think worth having, like, and discussing it as a medicine and as something like normalizing it like alcohol, I think. And it's just interesting
100%.
to see that happening in the show. I just love that a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and with I mean, that's amazing about the upcoming decriminalization. Like, as we at large move forward, who's being left behind? Really,
Yes,
I hope that
exactly.
the show asks.
Yeah. Aaron, I have so many more questions for you, but I know our time's up, and I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these
Well, good
questions
luck to
for
you.
me. I just really love this show, and it's so funny and complicated and interesting and just engaging with so many interesting things. So I hope you get a season two for the series. Everybody, please watch it on Prime. Fingers crossed, because season two would be awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure.